إن الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن والاه. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. My name is Shuaib Manjra, and I have the honor and the pleasure to facilitate today's discussion, which is about the crisis in Tunisia. Tunisia is important for us for a number of reasons. The first reason is that Tunisia was the fountain of the Arab Spring, which began in around 2010, 2011, with the self-immolation of Mohammed Bouazizi in Tunisia. And the Arab Spring resulted in a revolution in Tunisia, which was called the Jasmine Revolution. And that spread around North Africa and the Middle East, which had significant ramifications. Much of it rolled back, but it was a significant moment in the history of Muslims in the Middle East. So the first important point around today's discussion is discussing the fountain of the Arab Spring. The second is we discussing a personality who was central and one of the great thinkers of politics and Islam in our time, Sheikh Rashid al-Ghannouchi. Sheikh Rashid and leaders of Al-Nahda came up with new forms of political ideas within an Islamic framework or an Islamist framework, which in a sense created new models for us to think about Islamism, politics, and democracy. And Sheikh Rashid is probably one of the innovative thinkers, and his two books on democracy and human rights and values is kind of wonderful to read because he's creating new ideas for us in terms of using an Islamic paradigm in terms of how we operate in a modern world. Much of what Ebrahim, Rasool and others are also trying to do. And the third importance of it is that Tunisia created a model for us. And if the Tunisian model succeeded, it was a model of co-governance, of democracy in the region, based on the creation of a constituent assembly, a progressive constitution, and democracy. So if that model worked, it would have been a wonderful example to the rest of the world and to the Middle East in particular around how co-governance can work and how Islamists can work within the framework of the political domain and make a success of it. So it was, in a sense, a unique experiment which actually worked very well before the counter-revolution and the coup d'etat that resulted. So the first is the fountain of the Arab Spring. The second is, one of the most progressive thinkers of our time and creative thinkers. And which worked very well. But you're not here to listen to me. You're here to listen to a wonderful panel to speak about this experiment and the crisis that Tunisia faces currently. And prominent among them is the jailing of Sheikh Rashid al-Ghannouchi, who's 83 years old, in a sham trial in a country where the president has exercised sole authority and has disbanded many of the structures created after the Arab Revolution. So we've got three speakers tonight. I'll introduce two of them because the third one doesn't need an introduction to us. And the first speaker is Yusra Ghannouchi. Yusra is the daughter of Sheikh Rashid al-Ghannouchi, and she's a Tunisian British researcher and commentator. And she worked in the International Relations Department of the Al-Nahda movement, which is the movement of Sheikh Rashid al-Ghannouchi. Yusra is too modest to tell you that she's got a master's degree from Imperial College in Astrophysics, and she commenced a PhD in astrophysics before moving on to SOAS to study Islamic studies. So Yusra has both a tremendous kind of pedigree in the sciences as an astrophysicist, but also in Islamic studies. The second speaker is Ahmed Gaaloul. And Ahmed is an executive member of the An-Nahda party and a senior advisor to Sheikh Rashid al-Ghannouchi. Ahmed has degrees in philosophy, and he did a master's degree in philosophy in the UK. He studied in Morocco and also went to SOAS and studied Islamic studies. And our third speaker is Ambassador Ebrahim Rasool, and he needs no introduction to this audience. But before I begin, I was remiss in not recognizing some of the shuyukh who are among us, Ambassador Muhammad Dango, and so all protocol observed. So it gives me great pleasure to call Sheikh Ahmed Gaaloul to speak first, and then Yusra and Ebrahim.
Thank you very much. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I should go there. Okay. Shall I hand you the microphone? Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil mursaleen. Okay, well, first of all, thank you for having us, and more than happy for being with you. As I stand with you now, I like the opportunity which I have this morning with the Jumu'ah prayer. We are speaking in a different context. So I would like to give you an insight about our experience in Tunisia. Hopefully, I won't be long, about 10 minutes. So 10 minutes, I will try to summarize an experience for at least 10 years. But let me start with 1995 instead of 2010. You know that in 1995, most of the Arab countries, violence and Islam as a violence expression was a trend, whether in Algeria, in Libya, in Egypt, even in Afghanistan. So we had our first Congress or conference outside the country. Some of our members thought that the party needs to retaliate to the aggressions which we were facing with violence. So we need to retaliate violence with another violence. I mean, brothers and sisters were being tortured, raped. A husband or a man could have his mother in front of him and raped in front of him, or his wife. People were being killed. And we mostly were very young, in our 20s. So we had three options and three papers, policy papers, if you could say, during the Congress. One of them was calling to violence. The other one was saying, okay, we need to dissolve the party and to ask forgiveness from the Tunisian people and from the dictator at that time was Ben Ali. So it was heated, and some were tending to vote for violence. Sheikh Rashid stood at that time and made it clear that we are a peaceful political party which calls for a national amnesty and a national dialogue that excludes nobody. We were able to keep working and not to get our country into any type of violence. In my view, that helped Tunisia having a peaceful revolution. Actually, the term revolution, the term peaceful and revolution doesn't work together, because scientifically a revolution is a type of war. That's if you go to read books. So for the first time, the Muslim Ummah and Islam introduced or reintroduced the concept of a peaceful revolution. The same thing with what the Prophet ﷺ, when he entered Mecca, he made it peaceful. And that's why he was not really happy with Sayyidina Khalid bin Walid, with what he's done. Allahumma inni abra'u laka mimma yaf'aluhu Khalid. So this concept is Islamic, and this concept is humane. And this is what we actually were able to do in Tunisia. Beside a peaceful revolution, there were a call for an inclusive democratic process. That is why when many people in the street and in our members called for the exclusion of those who are described against as part of the old regime, Sheikh Rashid stood up and made it clear in a public gathering, more than 200,000 at that time, and he said, he who accepts the constitution is the son of the revolution. And after the first election, before those instances, he made it clear that we need to build a national consensus with those who are different from us, not those who are like us. That is why he tried to make, and he made a coalition with the Socialist Party, with the Marxist Party, because at the end of the day, you need to build a social contract or a dustur, or like the Wathiqat al-Medina, with those who are different from you, so that they come under that social contract, so that we have peace in society. And the first government, the first coalition government was composed of those ones. This has enabled us to survive for 10 years. And this has enabled what we brand as Muslim democracy, what Sheikh Rashid called as Muslim democracy, to be accepted widely and internationally. So, what has made a coup possible? Was it our failures? Was it because these Islamists, they don't know how to govern and they are failing? Is it because this political Islam cannot govern? I mean, when visiting for the first time South Africa for the last few days, I'm becoming aware that all the trouble we went through, you went through, like us, but still you didn't have a coup. And this makes me, support the idea that the coup did not happen because of the mistakes which I have made. Yes, we surely have made many, but the coup happened because there are local and regional local players supported by regional and international players who do not like and who are actively working so that this democratic model does not stand and does not stay anymore, so that they can create a narrative to say that these Arabs are not worthy for democracy. These Muslims cannot build a country, cannot make a democracy, cannot create prosperity. The French ambassador, after the coup, he came speaking to us. Well, he said, you are fragmented, and now the Tunisian people, they need a good economic system. They don't need democracy anymore. The French president, before the revolution, when he visited Ben Ali, he said, why are you complaining? You are eating, you are feeding, you are dancing. You don't need democracy. Tunisian people are happy. So basically, this is a perception. And I will not shy from saying that the French were actively behind the coup that has happened in Tunisia. It is true that right now they are not happy with this Qais Said because he could not keep any friend, and he's making an enemy everybody. But still, a coup has happened. So for Sheikh Rashid, when we were opposing the previous regime, we worked in a coalition. We didn't drag our country into any type of civil war or violence. When we had the revolution, he pushed towards an inclusive democratic process, preserving justice, preserving human rights. When we had the coup, he also said that this is a coup. I'm going to oppose it from the first hours, but peacefully and with others. And I'm not going to allow anybody to use Islam as a tool for dictatorship. And he branded the current president, that is Qais Said, who presents himself as defending Islam. He is a dictator, so I'm not going to stand with him. I'm not allied with him. I am allied with those who are defending the values of justice, human rights, dignity, even if they are not Muslims, even if they are different from me. Because this is what he understands by Muslim democracy. It is true that right now we are still suffering from dictatorship. But this dictatorship is failing. It is not a successful dictatorship. Well, you could say he's surviving for 4 years. Well, a dictatorship system can live up to 30 years. But unlike the system of Ben Ali, who reached the top of his crisis after 20 years, this dictatorship is in a dire crisis after less than 5 years. So we don't think that it will survive longer. And not only in Tunisia, and let me finish by this, even those regimes which made a coup, whether in Egypt or even in Syria, as you can see, or even in Sudan, they could not bring back the old regime, and they could not build a system that is sustainable and that is stable based on their dictatorship. That is why the first regime that failed was the Assad regime in Syria. The second regime that failed is right now the Sudanese regime, Hamiti and others, in Sudan. And I do think that the Egyptian regime is, I don't need to prove it, it is really failing, but now they need it to help them with what is happening in Palestine. Sadly, the Tunisian regime is needed by Europeans to help them get rid of the trouble of illegal migrants that are coming from Africa and allowing him to say all what we are ashamed of, racist discourse and crimes against people just because of the skin color. Many of them are Muslims. Many of them are good, Quran readers. But they are being put in ghettos in our country, the country of Zaytuna and Al Qayrawan, just because of the color of their skins. So nobody can accept that. Sadly, Europe, of the human right, Europe of the rule of law and justice and democracy is having a blind eye, because right now it is under the rule of those populists who do not worry. Would that lead us give up these values of democracy, human rights, and justice? No. Because Rasool Ghannouchi was defending these values since 1981, where we were oppressed, and he went into prison more than one time defending these values. And these values are ours. The problem is that this international community do not want to allow us, Africans, or people of the Middle East, what they call the people of the third world, to enjoy the right of democracy, freedom, and justice. So this is why we believe that we are still fighting the right fight, whether we are in power or in opposition, whether we are in prison or outside the country or inside the country, and that this fight is a common fight for us African, for us Muslims, and for us any human being that believes in freedom. So again, I do thank you for coming to listen to us and for wishing to know about what is happening in Tunisia. And I leave the floor now for Sister Yusra after the permission. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be upon you all. It fills me with great pleasure and joy to be among you today in this country that, whose past represents an inspiring legacy of the struggle for freedom and the unyielding human spirit of resistance, and whose present represents a force of moral leadership in this world where all values, all norms and all rules are being broken and violated every day, as we see in Gaza. It's been a great honor and pleasure to spend the last few days here in this great and beautiful country, among the beautiful community that you have, where I have felt the warmth despite the weather, and your great generosity and inspiring activism. And it has given me a glimpse of why my father loved so much to visit your country. My father, Rasool Ghannouchi, leader of another movement and speaker of the parliament that was dissolved as part of the coup against Tunisian democracy on the 25th of July 2021, visited South Africa many times, and there were always sources of inspiration for him to observe firsthand at work the ideas for which he had struggled for decades and written about, the ideas of building an inclusive democracy based on equal citizenship, where every member, regardless of faith, gender, or race, contributes equally and enjoys their rights and freedoms. And it is these values that he wished to establish in Tunisia after the revolution, after struggling for decades and being a political prisoner in Tunisia in the 80s, and then later living in exile for 20 years. We were given the opportunity in Tunisia to implement the dream of building an inclusive democracy in Tunisia. Without going into the details of how we went from the hopes and aspirations of January 2011 to where we are now, where Tunisia is being taken back to the days of a police state, people ruled through fear, where freedoms are being taken away, hundreds are languishing in prison for defending democracy. But it's enough to remember that revolutions do not occur or achieve their aims overnight. They take decades and centuries sometimes, as history teaches us. Revolutions do not progress in a linear way, but through cycles. And we find ourselves today in this cycle of retreat and backsliding. And I find myself once again speaking as the daughter of a political prisoner. My father was arrested on the 17th of April 2023, which was the 27th night of Ramadan, more than 2 years ago, as he was about to break his fast, when over 100 armed police officers stormed our family home, searched every drawer and every corner of our house, took my father's personal papers and took him away to an unknown location, not allowing him to break his fast or any access to lawyers or medication for more than 24 hours, after which he was charged for conspiracy against state security. And after that, more ridiculous, fabricated charges followed. His only crime is saying no loudly and clearly to the coup and to the will to take Tunisia back to dictatorship. And his leadership and contribution to building a broad coalition against the coup and to restore democracy in Tunisia. He is boycotting all hearings and all legal procedures in Tunisia because they do not respect any independence of the judiciary or any law, but he has still been sentenced in 3 separate cases out of 10 cases against him to 15 months in one case, 3 years in another case, and 22 years in the most recent case. So there is clearly the will to keep him in prison indefinitely, to punish him for his role in the democratic transition, and to ensure he does not play any role in the restoration of democracy in Tunisia. But I don't like to speak about him as a victim. He does not see himself as a victim, and I do not see him as a victim. This is the price that he believes must be paid for defending our freedoms, and he is willing to pay that. He continues to be optimistic and patient and persevering, as those of you who may have met him during his visits here know him to be, ever optimistic. He is spending his time in reflection and dhikr and writing and reading. He is following what is happening in Palestine, and he has sent many messages emphasizing his continued commitment to democracy and the struggle for freedom in Tunisia and around the Muslim world, and has urged everyone to stand in solidarity with the people of Palestine, the central cause for all Muslims. I would like to end with part of one of his recent messages from prison on the 2nd anniversary of his imprisonment, where he says, "As I enter my 3rd year of imprisonment in the prison of dictatorship, I remain firmly convinced that there is no solution without responsible freedom that accepts everyone, justice that excludes no one, and democracy for all based on equal rights. This is what we have always believed in, what we have called for, and what we continue to adhere to. We consider it the tried and tested solution. From Mornagia prison, after 2 years of siege, I find myself reassured, convinced that this country, plagued by successive dictatorships and one party or one pharaoh regimes, is a country that pioneered peaceful revolutions aimed at liberation, the last of which was the Jasmine Revolution, which inspired the world and proved, after the myth of the end of history and the end of revolutions, that humanity is still filled with the longing for freedom. Tyranny and injustice mean only one thing, that the time for sunrise has arrived. Tunisia, which created the dawn of the Arab Spring, which was plotted against and faltered. Tunisia, which lived in freedom for 10 years and held constituent, legislative, and municipal elections according to modern standards of pluralism, transparency, and independence, before its institutions were overthrown and its course deviated. All of this is evidence of the deep roots of democracy, freedom, and pluralism in its soil, deep within its history. What was achieved yesterday can be achieved again today and tomorrow in Tunisia, to raise the banner of freedom once again." So I wish to end with these words through which my father would be present amongst you, and to say that the struggle for freedom continues. And in this struggle, we continue to be inspired by our past struggles, like the historic struggle of the people of South Africa, and other struggles like the heroic struggle of the people of Palestine, until freedom prevails, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. Our respected moderator, our beloved guests from Tunisia, Sheikh Ihsan and the other ulama who are present, my dear brother, comrade and friend Muhammad Dango, and the leaders of our community. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh, and good evening. I want to say that the joy of being here tonight is that when a tragedy overshadows another tragedy, then an original tragedy may disappear from our consciousness. And what Dr. Ahmed and Dr. Yusra bring tonight is the sense that we are living in a world of multi-layered tragedies. And if we play favorites amongst them, and if we choose what is easier on our minds and our consciences, if we say that our energies will be directed here and I don't have the energy for that, then we forget the essential essence of a systemic kufr, al-kufr millatu wahid. That this injustice, this denial of truth, this suppression of what is faithful is a single undivided system. When we choose to fragment our attention, we give the tentacle of that same undivided system a freedom to operate in one place, while tolerating and pushing back only where all our efforts are directed in another place. And therefore, the antidote to the idea that kufr is a single undivided system is the idea of kana nasu ummatukum ummatu wahid, that humanity is a single community. And so tonight, I am so happy, Yusra and Ahmed, that you have come to interrupt our focus. Because this Cape Town, this community, this South Africa has been so steadfast, alhamdulillah, in its support for the people of Palestine and particularly Gaza in the face of a genocide, that we may have not understood how the space was made for a genocide when we allowed a coup in Egypt violently, and then more subtly but equally hard in Tunisia. And therefore, the capacity of the Ummah and the capacity of the global South and the freedom and justice-loving people in the world must never be allowed to be fragmented. Even though some things jump at our sense of well-being with the sheer devastation of the genocide. And so we go back to what caused the very vicious counter reaction to the Muslim world today, and the desire to absolutely dominate the Muslim consciousness, the Arab world, and the freedom-loving world. It was that moment in 2011 when Tunisia sparked a revolution, because what Tunisia did was to show something that the world denied, that Muslims love freedom. Because the myth was that we, in our submission to Allah, will submit to our dictators as well. That Muslims also want rights, because we help propagate a myth that where we can pray, that's the right that we most enjoy. And the surge for democracy and for participation and inclusion in the decision-making of society was one in which almost, they said, we had a love affair with the notion of a sultan. You see, that's what Muhammad Bouazizi blew up that day. That we were a submissive people. We are Muslim, we submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it does not make us a submissive person, because in the act of submitting to Allah, we free ourselves from submission to anyone else. That was brought home by Tunisia. And so, in a sense, to understand the suppression of Palestine, you've got to go back to the signal that was sent that Palestine will not rest until they have what Tunisia re-fired in the minds of the Muslim masses, because we have an ambiguity with issues like democracy, human rights, and freedom. If you put 5 scholars in a room and you say, does Islam support democracy? You'll get 5 answers. You're lucky if one of them says yes. If you ask 5 scholars in one room, does Islam support human rights? You'll get 5 different answers, and you'll be lucky if one of them gives an unambiguous yes. If you put 5 scholars in a room and you say, does Islam love freedom? You'll get 5 different answers. You'll be lucky if one of them gives you an unconditional yes. That's our ambiguity with human rights, freedom, and democracy. And that's what makes the West think that in their domination of the Muslim world, they can give us the triple bypass of democracy, human rights, and freedom. And so, this in essence is what we come to really put on the table with Yusra and Ahmed tonight here, to remind us not only that a dear friend, an exceptional leader, a profound scholar of Islam is in jail on hunger strike. So we come to be told about that, but they come here to remind us what happened in Tunisia that sparked the Arab Spring. And to remind us that in all of our solidarity, if we are not able to assert that we stand for that, if we don't assert what we stand for, then we will forever be the mourners at the graves of our martyrs. Because the notion of progress and revolution is that when a revolution does not have a deep set of values that it establishes as its vision, it may turn out to be a revolution that may only want to avenge the past. If we are not fired up by the excitement and the glory of this is what we want to see in Palestine. Participation through shura, rights through however we put down our rights, and freedom to be who we are. If we can't say that, because I don't hear that at marches. In South Africa, we were marching to Pretoria. In South Africa, we were marching for freedom. In South Africa, we wanted our rights here, now, and all. Our vision was so clear that we didn't need to avenge the past. I'm not sure that I hear at the marches, yes, we want a ceasefire. Yes, we want an end to the genocide. We know what we don't want. But I'm not sure that we have the unambiguity of knowing what we stand for. And the reason that I raise this here in the presence of Sheikh Rashid Ghannouchi's daughter is because here was the kind of alim that the Quran describes as ulul ilm qa'iman bil qist. People of knowledge standing for justice. We have lots of angry ulama, and they are rightfully angry about the genocide, and they must be angry about the injustice, the impunity of the Israeli state. But I need to hear a Sheikh Rashid Ghannouchi emerge from amongst us to say, I am a Muslim Democrat. To say that I stand for a Dawlat al-Madaniyah, a civil state. To say that I want a multi-party democracy. To say that I want the right to express myself, the right to associate, the right to be, and the right for others to be. That's the Rashid al-Ghannouchi that I have had the absolute pleasure of meeting, of speaking with, and of inviting to forums where he came to address the Muslim minority leadership across the world. He didn't engage in sophistry. Can you say Muslim and minority in the same breath? Is it a psychological minority or is it a numerical minority? He understood that in his address to us that day in Paris, and we chose Paris because that was the heart of Islamophobia at the moment in 2013. And he came and he said, I want to make my speech on how Muslim minorities must live by the maqasidu Sharia, the intents and the objectives of the Sharia, and not only strive to implement the rules and regulations of Sharia. This is the kind of qualitative nuance in the thinking of a Rashid al-Ghannouchi. Who amongst us are capable of holding such opposing ideas in your head without feeling schizophrenic? That's Rashid al-Ghannouchi, the man who went, and it's not this latest overthrow was just the most drastic in 2023. But there were moments, and Ahmed was present in either advising or in the parliaments or in the governments of making strategic decisions. And strategy and Muslim don't always go in the same sentence, because we feel things more than we think through things. We can deal with the enemy down the road, but we can't anticipate the enemy around the corner. Anticipating the enemy around the corner is the stuff of strategy. But here was Sheikh Rashid al-Ghannouchi understanding after the coup d'etat in Egypt, understanding, do we want to lose the whole revolution in Tunisia? Or is this the moment for a tactical and strategic retreat from government? Give the government to them and save the revolution. Where is that generosity anywhere amongst us? That strategic generosity to say, give them the government to save the revolution, even if ideologically we are not entirely with them, but they are part of the forces for change. so that we don't allow the forces of the status quo to overthrow all of us. That's the Rashid al-Ghannouchi that I've come to love and admire and look forward to, and that I miss immensely in this moment in the world when it appears that the Muslim world is being set up for decimation. I'm not saying is going to be, because that is not in their power. But that's their desire. And so we need to be able to understand, how do we not see Tunisia as another case requiring our sympathy? Of course we must be sympathetic and empathetic with the loss of a revolution and the jailing of exceptional leaders. But we almost, in a sense, going back to the origins of our aspirations. That Muhammad Bouazizi had fired in all of us and sparked across the region and captured the imagination across the world and drew out the forces of reaction. And so, what we need to begin to understand is that at this moment, the Huntington Project is back in play. Having shown that we are capable of democracy, human rights, and freedom, the Huntington Project speaks that it is not the form of government for Muslims that is important, but the degree of government that is important. Not whether it's democratic or not, but whether it is strong or not. Case, Said is the example of strong government. Not democratic, not nice, not inclusive, not rights-based government. That's not on the agenda. Muslim countries must be ruled only through the military and the bureaucracy. The one to collect the taxes and the other one to keep stability. Nothing else is important. That is what is being played out. That is the future intended for Palestine, or what's left, the remnants of the Palestinians. That's the future that is being played out for Iran. Hence, this yearning for the Shah's son to be reinstalled and so forth. That is the future, to kill the DNA of shura, of rights, and of freedom, hurriya, amongst our people. And so, my respected brothers and sisters, I want to really say, we've almost gone back to the origin of the renewal of our dreams for democracy, human rights, and freedom by having Tunisia in the house. By being reminded of the presence and the gravitas of Sheikh Rashid al-Ghannouchi. And to tell us very forcefully, if you can't keep multiple struggles in your mind, you are contributing to the fragmentation of the ummah, the fragmentation of our focus, the fragmentation of our attention, and we are giving a free pass to the same forces of reaction and darkness in every other country except in one. And so, my respected brothers and sisters, we make dua, inshallah, that Sheikh Rashid al-Ghannouchi will be with us soon, inshallah. That he will be able, even in the prison cell, to write the kind of works that we must read if we want to have a fiqh of mu'amalat, a fiqh of the world, because we publish so many books, rightfully Sheikh Ihsan, so many books on the fiqh al-ibadah. We're perfecting one book after the other, competing who can be stricter than the other, making Islam more difficult for everyone today in order with difficulty comes piety. That's our idea. No one is writing the fiqh of mu'amalat, the fiqh of the socio-political and economic, and that's the work that Sheikh Rashid al-Ghannouchi has been such a doyen of. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make him prolific wherever he is, in prison or out of prison. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us followers of his thinking and his writing and his leadership as we are for every leader in the Palestinian struggle. Wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.
Jazakumullahu khairan, Ahmed, Yusra, and Ebrahim for those words. What's kind of what stands out, and speaking to Yusra over the last 2 days about Sheikh Rashid, in addition to what Ebrahim has spoken to him about, and as an intellectual leader and a leader of ijtihad in our community, is his sense of hope, not his sense of victimhood, but his sense of hope, but also an overarching bravery. And Yusra was telling me some of the stories about his prison experiences and how he's dealing with it, and it's just remarkable the level of bravery he has. And Yusra is too modest to bring it out today, but it's just inspiring in the way he's dealt with it. That he's refused to accept the legal system, he refuses to go to court, he refuses to be humiliated by the system. So what comes out very strongly is the issue around his bravery, his sense of hope, and not being a victim. The second point that I think Ahmed tried to bring out very strongly is that, and I speak about the West in a very broad category, speaks about values of human rights, about values about democracy, about plurality, and about inclusiveness. That Muslim societies or Islamic societies are incapable of that kind of politics. And I think what Tunisia tried to show, and I said this in my introduction, is that yes, we can do it. Yet they were not happy with it. So these are virtues that don't exist in the West, but they're used as veneers to exercise power. So the last thing they want is freedom and democracy. All they want is power and different ways to exercise that power. So whatever you want, we gave it to you, but that's not good enough. And I think, Ebrahim made this point again, that we criticized the Ikhwan in Egypt, and we said, well, you won the elections, you took power, and you set yourself up as a target. What did Tunisia do? They learned from the experience. The An-Nahda party won the majority, said, we will not rule alone. We will not take power. We will have a power-sharing agreement. But again, the point I was making, even that is not good enough. So, whether you do or you don't, you're damned. That's the way it operates. And the final point, I think, again, Ebrahim made this point, and I'll summarize it, is that Palestine happens because we allowed the coup in Algeria to happen. Palestine happens because we allowed the coup in Egypt to happen. Palestine happens because we allowed the coup in Tunisia to happen. Palestine happens because we allow what's happening in Sudan to happen, or in Somalia. That these are all interlinked struggles. They're not isolated struggles. And that's why our sense of solidarity needs to be inclusive of all of these struggles, which, because we're confronted with a genocide, kind of move to the periphery. And as Ebrahim described, we have tragedy upon tragedy, and we don't know where to focus. But we must have the ability to focus and see this as a problem of systems rather than individual countries. So it's a global system. With that, and sorry, I also forgot to mention that Ahmed was the minister in government of youth and sport, and that's why we have much in common. Both youth and sport. With that, I'll open it up for discussion, and I'm sure many people have many questions. So I'll open up the floor and take 3 questions at a time. Sufyan.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I just want to share a quick story for Yusra, that in 1995, when your father came to South Africa, my father spent a lot of time with him, and he complained to my father at that time. He was in exile in London, as you know, that the Tunisians were complaining that he wasn't doing enough activity. And he said to my father, said, Sheikh, you know, we went to London as refugees, not as conquerors. And my father said, you will return to Tunisia as a conqueror. And subhanAllah, to a degree, it happened in 2011. He came back as a conqueror to a big reception, and unfortunately, you know, now find himself back in jail. But I think maybe just a follow-up question, and I think you mentioned this, you know, that you damned either way. You know, the Egypt coup happened, and then Tunisia did a power sharing, and that still didn't happen. You know, what is the way forward? Do we, you know, what is our political strategy? Or even Ebrahim Rasool was saying, how do we approach things? Is it the Syria model where we take things by force, even if 60% of the country is destroyed? But I don't think there can be a counter coup. Which is our, I don't think that was very clear in terms of the strategy for us, political strategy going forward. Now, Ebrahim also mentioned, look, they want to destroy these countries, and you said, look, the strategy is to see the enemy around the corner. So I just want some more information on our strategy going forward, please. Thank you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Yes, Shoaib. Okay. My question to our respected brother and sister, you know, counter-revolutions happen because the deep state continues to be in place. And I'm just interested in that period after you say you had your revolution. What did you do with the deep state of Ben Ali? Because that deep state was obviously at the behest of the French. They kept Ben Ali in power. They are probably the same people who made sure that Case come into power. So I hear your points about everybody who gives their allegiance to the Constitution must be included and all of these things. But that does not necessarily mean that the people who had oppressed you, who had tortured you, who had raped you, who had done all of those things, appreciate the same sentiment. So I just wanted to know from your own experience what it was that you had done and how you had managed the deep state that undermined your democracy. Shukran.
There's a question in the middle here.
Assalamu alaikum. I think we need to think a bit, and I'm glad that Ebrahim raised the idea of the class of civilization, the Huntington theory. And because that is also one system. I think we focus on the system and the response within the Muslim community, but there's also the broader system of the class of civilization. And I'm reminded that one of our think tanks in South Africa, the Institute for Security Studies, when the Egyptian revolution happened, Annelie Boetak advised, we can't support the Muslims in Egypt because of the threat of the Algerian Muslims, just to indicate how that system is also one system that continuously support and reinforce one another. So I think we also need to see those movements, and in terms of the idea of the deep state, frequently it's not within the local country, it's at a far greater or higher level. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, let me go with the concept of the deep state and what was the role of the deep state, and whether this concept of amnesty, which Sheikh Rashid has called for, was one of the causes which might have led to a coup. So this question is truthfully asked, and many are asking such question. But when we look to what is actually happening. This coup that has happened in Tunisia, is it the regeneration of the old regime? And those who are governing right now the country, are they members of the old regime? I would say no, that is not the case at all. Why is that and how is that? First of all, because we were able, unlike sadly many other countries, to survive for 10 years. So it is true that in Egypt, for example, many of those who were part of the old regime are now in power. That is true. But this regime of Sisi is not the regime of Mubarak. It's not. Why is that? Because the revolution happens actually because the old regime collapsed from inside. So that a revolution becomes possible. A revolution is not possible if the regime is strong. Once the regime is strong and there is a social uprisal, the regime crushes the people. But people will keep resisting until the system and the regime becomes rotten from inside, and there is a coincidence between the resistance of the people, the rottenness of the regime, and the lack of interest of the regional and international community. So they are not supporting that regime anymore. If we analyze, for example, what happens in Syria, 2013, the Syrian people have revolted. Their revolt has led to almost the regime losing 70% of the country. But the interference of international regional actors and the propaganda to renew the image of al-Assad that he is acceptable, that he's going to do reforms, has sustained that regime. When the regime has fell, everybody will go and shake his hand while, taking their nose, because they don't like him anymore. So they are not ready to defend him anymore. So the same thing for revolution that happened. We need a regional and international context. A coup happens because there is a regional and international context that allows it. In Tunisia, Qais Said is not, his regime is not the old regime. And it's not the deep state. And actually part who are prosecuted with us and who are in prison with us are members of the old regime who were with Ben Ali. Because those people enjoyed coming to power via the elections 2014. And now they are in coalition with us. So we cannot say that Qais Said's regime is a deep state. Most of the bureaucracy, even though they are not revolting, but they are not happy. Even security forces, even though if they are corrupt, but they were working under the rule of law. Now any boss will come and tell him, do that and put your nose on the floor. So they went to old days of humiliation. In my view, when we have a revolution, there is what we call the justice, the what is the word? The transitional justice. That was one of our mistakes. We didn't apply that. Yes. You cannot have a revolution and justice if there is no transitional justice. We were weak. We were not strong enough. The counter-revolutionary power were too strong for us. That is, yes, I would accept that. But the coup did not happen because we have allowed those who were before in power to participate within a democratic system. Even the network of business people who were enjoying the dictatorship before, within the new system they found that it is possible for them to do business. So these 10 years, in my understanding, have helped gaining new friends, and by opening the door for them, it has lessened the level of resistance to change. What has led the coup to a coup? Primarily in Tunisia, it is the regional agenda. Mainly, you had the Turks coming to Libya, and France losing its authority in the sub-Saharan region and North Africa, and fearing that Turkey will be the main power with an alliance with the Nahda. And they said it. I'm giving you an information. With Emirates and Egypt, who are working for the Abrahamic Accord. And they don't want a democracy. They don't want especially a democracy that is led by an Islamic party, and furthermore by Ghannouchi, one of the main prominent leaders of the Islamic parties. So this is the case of Tunisia. In Egypt, it is worse than that. Egypt is the heart of the Ummah. I mean, the Israelis were knocking doors from the first day that there was a revolution in Egypt. They feared for their existence. They fear Egypt. They fear the people of Egypt more than they fear a nuclear bomb from Iran. If Egypt is free, then all the Ummah will be free, believe me. History of the world will change once the change actually happens and gets stabilizes in Egypt. However, we need to be aware that what happened in Syria is a major event, because the Sham region, it is heavy strategic part of the history of humanity, not only of the Middle East. And that was not possible if we didn't have 2011 and if we didn't have the 7th of October. So history as we see it, it is not going back. It doesn't go back to the old regime. It is going forward. Yes, there is retaliation, but we are moving forward.
First, I'd like to thank the brother who told me about the meeting between his father and my father in London. And the last few days I've been humbled by so many stories. My father had made so many friends here, and it's been my honor and pleasure to meet them here. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Ambassador Dangour, Ambassador Rasool, Brother Faisal, Brother Ebrahim, Brother Ismail Vadi, and so many others who have welcomed us so warmly and who have facilitated this visit that's been of great inspiration to us. Now, on the point of the counter-revolution and the deep state, I'm not going to say that all the decisions that were made were the right decisions, but it's important to look at the bigger picture and remember that every revolution has a counter-revolution. As the forces of change struggle against the forces pulling back. And our role is to keep trying, to have the patience and the perseverance to continue. And to remember that although the situation we've described now of the dismantling of democracy in Tunisia, the undoing of all the achievements that were made, that is disheartening, but we are not starting from zero again. Every time we start and we build on the progress that was made, and we should not forget all the progress that was made. When you look at Tunisia now, the fact that there are political prisoners and people who are willing to sacrifice their freedom and continuing, despite the repression, to protest, and the fact that whereas in the previous round, the previous cycle, we had the crackdown on Nahda and the movement for change in 1990, 1991. It took, more than 10 years for other parties to start to, learn the lesson that once you have dictatorship, it will not target just one party. It will destroy all politics, all democracy. So it took a long time for other parties to begin to work together with Nahda and to work to, topple dictatorship. In Tunisia, it's taken 2 years, alhamdulillah, after the coup. And Nahda is not by itself. And after the coup, yes, my father went out on the first day, the first night before Parliament to declare that this is a coup that must be opposed at all cost. But then there was a kind of retreat to make sure that there is not a polarization once again between Nahda and the regime, and that there are others, that there is a broad coalition. So this shows us that we must continue. We cannot lose hope. A believer has no choice but to continue trying our best, inshallah.
No, thank you very much. I think I want to underscore the point that the ancient regime, the old status quo, is not the case. It's not even Trump. It's not Sisi. They are not fighting to restore Reagan in the White House and bin Ali in Tunisia and Mubarak in Egypt. And it's part of what got me into trouble in the US. I described the Trump administration not as Republican, but as an insurgency, because it is mainstreamed extremism. It has all the characteristics of extremism, but it has the power of the mainstream. And therefore, if we mischaracterize what is happening and we use old binaries, we will make judgments. And we will not make strategy to confront what is as it is. And that's why the left, to a large extent, becomes irrelevant in understanding what is happening, because they are using terms of analysis that is not making sense of the insurgency that is against incumbency. And they see the elites in both the Republican Party as well as in the Democratic Party as their enemies. And so Qais does not exist to return bin Ali, but to push bin Ali down together with any forces for change in that society. But the nice thing is that this insurgency is an equal opportunity offender and injurer. And in that lies the possibility of strategy. You see, in this round of injustice, victimization, domination, and so forth, no one should monopolize victimhood. Because the moment you say Islamophobia is worse than racism, you create a fragmentation in the forces for change. The moment you say, of course, Palestine is suffering most heavily, but the moment you say that Palestine will be more important than Iran, you are fragmenting. You are trying to monopolize victimhood. Victimhood is going to be generic in different forms. Bigotry is going to manifest itself against Muslims as Islamophobia, blacks as racism, strangers as xenophobia, gays as homophobia, and all of those kind of things. That's how it's going to manifest itself. And the worst we can do is to fragment all the victims of this insurgency that's globally going about. So sometimes you're going to have to hold your nose and make alliances, make coalitions, create fronts, because that is the counterbalance, and that's the kind of thing that the ground in America showed on the kind of No Kings Day, when they were able to outnumber For example, those who turned up for the military parade, the display of might, and the sign of hubris. And so what we need to do is also to do that locally, wherever we are. Connect the struggle against Palestine for the genocide there with, for example, the Black Lives Matter. And so unless we are able to do that, and there's a fancy word called intersectionality, but we just got to make common cause. And second last thing, Chairperson, is that what we do then at that local level, we've got to do at the global level. We are not yet in a favorable position to have a perfect multilateralism. We still are very unilateral in the way in which the world is being run. But the reason South Africa is specifically being singled out is because in 1 year we convened BRICS and the word de-dollarization came up. In 1 year we convened the African Union and the idea of strengthening against the Western markets began to come up. And so, all in all, what we need to do is to see that the insurgency sees the growth, not of multilateralism yet, but multipolarity. More poles in the world, more centers of potential power. And we've got to build that up and turn it into a capacity for multilateralism. And lastly, we've got to be able to build a vision, not with an ideological lens, because then we divide the globe. Because then we say, if you want to be part of our coalition, be a Marxist. If you want to be part of this coalition, be a Muslim. You've got to build it with a human lens. What makes people suffer? And then you will see blacks suffering racism and gun violence. Then you will see Hispanics being deported, the victims of xenophobia. Then you're going to see this, then you're going to see that. And what hurts people is what is going to unite people. Not the ideological language. As such, we can compete behind the scenes for which ideology prevails. But we've got to do it, and we've got to do it on the minimum basis of commonness. Not perfect belief, not perfect behavior, not perfect lifestyles, but lifestyles that we can work with and make it into a global anti-insurgency movement that the world requires. Thanks very much.
Jazakallah khairan to the speakers for their wonderful responses. You know, I recognize that there's two questions which haven't been answered. The one is around the clash of civilizations and Samuel Huntington's thesis about clash of civilizations. You know, I think Ebrahim alluded to this around clash of civilizations, that if you look at the right-wing agenda, this insurgency that's coming from the Trumpist right at the moment, is not about a clash of civilization between the West and Islam. It's a clash of civilizations within the United States itself. Now, some may argue that it's, the Democrats and the Republicans are the same, but if you read the agenda of the right wing in the United States and you read some of the documentation and you listen to the interviews, there's a deep hatred for what they call the liberal agenda. So there's a clash within an internal civilization. It's not only against somebody else. At some point, the United States was going to fracture in some way because this militancy which has become mainstream in the right wing, and it's going to fragment in itself. And we don't know where that's going to happen, but but that's going to happen. So the point I'm making is that read the right wing agenda. It is well developed. It is well thought out. It goes back before Reagan, and now it's being implemented in a more radical way. So there's this clash within the West as well. The second question that wasn't answered was the Egyptian model of taking power didn't work. The An-Nahda model in Tunisia didn't work in terms of a power-sharing model. What's the future? And I don't think we have an answer to that. I think it's a dialectic. We need to kind of look at each situation, but I think the point of, and the approach of Sheikh Rashid and An-Nahda is the way we need to continue, in a way of being inclusive, in a way of still appealing to those values of human rights and democracy, etc.
But ultimately, it's hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakil. It's in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They say that they plan and Allah plans is the best of planners. وَمَكَرُوا وَمَكَرَ اللَّهُ وَاللَّهُ خَيْرُ الْمَاكِرِينَ. So it remains for me to thank all of you for attending tonight and allowing us to focus on another region which is on our periphery, and that's North Africa and Tunisia in particular. And as Ebrahim said, our struggle needs to be intersectional, but also, don't look at Palestine in isolation from what's happening in Syria, what's happening in Tunisia, and what's happening in Egypt. So thank you very much for coming, and we really appreciate it. And I just want to thank the Muslim Youth Movement for hosting us tonight, Awqaf for supporting us financially, and to the brothers Ahmed and his group who hosted us last night so beautifully, and the small groups of people, in the Western Cape who are coming together and saying, what can we do? And what must be done, and how can we assist Tunisia? I think, inshallah, we need to probably have some kind of support group, not very large, but in some way in which we can take forward the agenda of the struggle of Tunisia to achieve freedom, liberty, democracy, inshallah. It leaves me to call Sheikh Ihsan Talib to end with the dua, inshallah. Bismillah.
Shukran, Dr. Manjra, for reinforcing the notion that ulama are prayer leaders. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. يا ربنا لك الحمد كما ينبغي لجلال وجهك ولعظيم سلطانك. ربنا لك الحمد سبحانك لا نحصي ثناء عليك أنت كما أثنيت على نفسك. فلك الحمد حتى ترضى ولك الحمد إذا رضيت ولك الحمد بعد الرضا. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد في الأولين وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد في الآخرين وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد في كل وقت وحين وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد في الملأ الأعلى إلى يوم الدين وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد إلى أن ترث الأرض ومن عليها وأنت خير الوارثين. اللهم اجعل جمعنا هذا جمعا مرحوما وتفرقنا من بعده تفرقا معصوما ولا تجعل فينا ولا منا شقيا ولا محروما. اللهم ألهمنا مراشد أمورنا ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا. اللهم يا ربنا إنا نسألك أن تؤيد الإسلام وتنصر المسلمين وتنصر بفضلك كلمة الحق والدين يا رب العالمين. اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين. اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين. اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين. اللهم انصر إخواننا المسلمين المستضعفين والمجاهدين يا ربنا في كل مكان. اللهم انصرهم ولا تنصر عليهم وكلهم ناصرا ومؤيدا. اللهم انصر إخواننا المسلمين المستضعفين يا ربنا في فلسطين وفي إيران وفي السودان وفي يا ربنا في تونسيا ويا ربنا في كشمير ويا ربنا وفي مصر يا ربنا في كل مكان. اللهم فرج هم المهمومين ونفس كرب المكروبين واقض الدين عن المدينين واحمي حوزة الدين يا رب العالمين. اللهم يا ربنا اشفي مرضانا. اللهم يا ربنا وفك أسرانا. اللهم وفك أستاذنا الشيخ راشد الغنوشي وفك عنه يا رب العالمين وفرج عنه يا رب العالمين. اللهم ربنا إنا نسألك رضاك والجنة ونعوذ بك من سخطك والنار. اللهم يا ربنا فرج هم المهمومين. اللهم فرج هم المهمومين ونفس كرب المكروبين. اللهم ونفس كرب المكروبين. اللهم يا ربنا اللهم انصر إخواننا المسلمين المستضعفين. اللهم انصرهم على أعدائك أعداء الدين اليهود الصهاينة الغاصبين المحتلين. اللهم عليك بالصهيون فإنهم لا يعجزونك. اللهم عليك بهم وخذهم أخذ عزيز مقتدر. اللهم يا ربنا أرنا فيهم عجائب قدرتك وخذهم أخذ عزيز مقتدر. اللهم يا ربنا أحصهم عددا واقتلهم بددا ولا تبق منهم أحدا يا رب العالمين. اللهم آمنا في أوطاننا وأصلح أئمتنا وولاة أمورنا واجعل ولايتنا في من خافك وتقاك يا رب العالمين. اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه، وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه، ولا تجعله ملتبسا علينا فنضله. أسألك يا ربنا أن تقبل منا جميعا بسر سورة الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. قال الله تعالى إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وصحبه وبارك وسلم. فضلك دعوهم فيها سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك فيها السلام، وآخر دعواهم الحمد لله رب العالمين.